Today, we're going to break down the mind of a true original, a guy who didn't just play music, but actually built an entire reality around his work. A man who showed us how to build a sovereign rebellion. This is the Zappa Principle.
So everything, and I mean everything, starts with this one powerful realization. Frank Zappa looked at the music industry and saw a system that was obsessed with just one thing: the hook. You know, that perfect 3-minute pop song they could sell over and over. But Zappa, he saw a huge weakness there. He got that the real power wasn't in some disposable hook, but in the hardware, the system, the studio, the master tapes, the whole infrastructure that makes the art. He knew for sure that to win on his own terms, he couldn't play their consensus game. No way. He had to build his own.
All right, here's the plan for this explainer. First, we'll dig into the moments that made him a rebel. Then, we'll step inside his fortress, the studio. We'll decode his main philosophy, conceptual continuity. And then we'll see that philosophy get put to the test in the US Senate. After that, we'll look at the powerful equation he left for all of us, and finally, figure out how you can use this principle in your own life.
Okay, Section 1, the hinge of genius. Look, to really get Zappa's strategy, you have to understand the world that made him. This isn't just some backstory, okay? This is the literal source code for his entire way of thinking. It's the logic that powered every single decision he ever made.
And that's not a metaphor. I mean, he literally did. As a kid, Frank Zappa lived right next to the Edgewood Arsenal, a U.S. Army chemical weapons plant. Gas mask drills, that was just a normal part of growing up. He breathed what the source material calls the fumes of defense. And at home, he'd watch his own dad, a chemical warfare specialist, handle pure mercury, a serious neurotoxin, with his bare hands right there in the living room. This constant simmering exposure to hidden dangers, it shaped his entire view of the world. He learned really early on that normal life was filled with unseen threats and total absurdities.
So you see, his rebellion wasn't just some teenage phase. It was baked into his DNA. While other kids were buying pop records, he was spending his cash on these obscure, atonal classical records, music that's designed to break the rules of melody. It was the perfect soundtrack for a mind that questioned absolutely everything. But the moment that really solidified it all was the incident at Studio Z. He got set up in a sting operation, arrested on these phony charges for making a funny audio tape for a bachelor party, and sitting in that jail cell, it hit him. The system wasn't just unfair, it was a potential death trap for anyone who dared to be different.
After that, he really felt like a pariah, an outcast, and this feeling just got stronger when he got into the music scene. Think about it. In the drug-fueled peace and love 60s, Zappa was famously strictly anti-drug. And it wasn't about morals, not really. It was strategic. He saw the whole hippie thing as just another form of mindless consensus, something that dulled your brain. So he was an outsider, even among the outsiders. And that deep sense of being alone became the fuel for his entire life's work, to build a world where he never needed anyone's approval ever again.
Which brings us right to Section 2, the sovereignty of the studio. This was his answer to a world he didn't trust. He didn't try to change the system. He just decided to build a whole new one, a fortress where he and only he made all the rules.
Just think about that number for a second. 18 hours a day. This wasn't just a crazy work ethic, it was a strategy of total control. Zappa knew way before computers made it easy that the person who controls the tape is the person who controls reality. Yeah, this amazing quote, "The edit is the composition." For him, cutting up and splicing magnetic tape for 18 hours straight wasn't a chore. It was how he meticulously built his own universe, one tiny, sovereign piece at a time.
So how did he pull this off? Well, it all stood on 4 unbreakable pillars. First, and this is the big one, own your masters. He fought like hell for this because he knew that if a record label owned his recordings, they owned him. So for him, ownership was non-negotiable. Second, the studio is the forge. He turned being isolated into a weapon, making his home studio a 24/7 lab for sonic experiments. Third, the work is the strategy. He wasn't trying to write a pop hit. He was trying to find what he called the logic of the noise, the truth hidden inside the chaos. And finally, the stage is an office. Performing was just a job, but his sovereignty, his total control over his work, that was forever.
And all of this starts to build into this really impressive philosophy. That brings us to Section 3, the Code of Continuity. This is where that raw, rebellious instinct starts to sharpen into the cold, hard logic of a master strategist. Okay, this is Zappa's grand theory, conceptual continuity. Basically, he said that everything he ever made,
A dirty joke on an album, a complex symphony, a wild guitar solo, even a random comment in an interview was all part of one single giant interconnected project. Now, why does that matter? It matters because the world wants to put artists in little boxes, and Zappa just erased all the boxes. By refusing to be put in a genre, he became his own genre, and that gave him incredible leverage.
And this quote just nails his new way of thinking. In Zappa's world, talent was just the price you paid to get in the door. It was the bare minimum. The real potential for greatness, the ceiling, was determined by how smart and how strategic your rebellion was. This was a complete rejection of the idea that artists should just passively follow trends. No, for Zappa, the artist had to be an active, strategic, and often a combative force.
This chart breaks down the difference perfectly. You've got the standard industry model, which is like a jam session. It's kind of passive, just hoping for a lucky break. It follows trends, and it's all about finding a commercial hit. Then you have Zappa's studio, which was a laboratory. It was systematic, based on intense experiments. It didn't follow trends, it tried to create a hinge to pivot the entire culture. And the goal was never a hit, it was to find the truth.
You know, the key insight here is just so profound. The music, that was only one part of his plan. His real weapon, the thing that gave him true power, was the infrastructure he built around the music. By mastering his own business, owning his work, and pioneering new tech like the Synclavier, this crazy expensive early digital synthesizer, he built a system so powerful and unique that the world eventually had to come to him on his terms. Which brings us to the ultimate test of his entire life's work. Section 4, the logic of the fight. This is where Zappa's sovereign system, built for decades in his own little world, goes head-to-head with one of the most powerful groups on the planet, the United States Senate. Now, before this big public fight, Zappa had already turned his philosophy into a reality. He trained his musicians so intensely they became what he called human synclaviers, able to switch from jazz to rock to classical on a single hand signal. He did what the source calls the detail audit, obsessing over every single note to make sure it was intentional. The result was this system of incredible systematic flexibility, the perfect weapon against the rigid, predictable, boring brute force of a government committee.
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? The PMRC hearings in 1985, you had the Parents Music Resource Center, backed by powerful politicians, bringing this storm of moral outrage to Washington to try and censor music. And into this emotional hurricane walks Frank Zappa, armed not with outrage, but with the cool, unshakable logic he'd been perfecting his entire life. What's so cool here is looking at this as a clash of two different operating systems. The Senate's weapons were performative outrage, fear, and trying to get a simple, damning soundbite. Zappa's counterweapons, pure First Amendment logic, that systematic flexibility he'd been training for, and a brutal commitment to the unvarnished truth. It was a totally uneven fight, just not in the way they expected.
And that was the core of his argument. Simple, direct, logically airtight. He absolutely refused to get dragged into their emotional game. He didn't get angry, he just calmly laid out the facts and took their proposals apart with surgical precision. His logic was so clean, their main weapon, fear, had nothing to grab onto. As the source material puts it, their fear just ran through his logic like water through a pipe. He won not by being louder, but by being smarter.
So what was the big payoff for all this? Well, that leads us to Section 5, the independence equation. The reward for decades of strategic rebellion wasn't just a personal win in DC, it was a brand new blueprint, a new equation for every independent creator that came after him.
This is it, the Zappa equation. He proved that talent alone is vulnerable. It can be exploited, it can be mismanaged, it can be ignored. But when you combine real talent with a smart, strategic, systematic rebellion against the way things are supposed to be done, you create the conditions for genius. This equation became a weapon. It proved that a funny song, if it's backed by a sovereign system and an iron will, could be one of the most important political acts of the decade.
This just perfectly shows the shift he created. The old model was all about chasing the charts, pleasing record labels, and getting everyone to agree. Zappa completely blew that up. He replaced it with a new model where success is measured differently. What matters is your sovereignty, your ownership of the master tapes, and your commitment to your own truth. I mean, that's basically the model that runs the entire independent creator economy today. And what he proved, in the end, was that the most feared thing in a massive billion-dollar industry wasn't another giant corporation. It was one person. A single, sovereign individual with a clear plan and total control over their own work. In a world that runs on consensus, that is the ultimate power.
Which brings us to our final section, and this one's all about you. Section 6, Your Rebellion, Your Greatness. How do we take this incredible story and turn it into something we can actually use in our own work, in our own lives?
Zappa's whole life teaches us to stop fighting trends and start building principles. So I want you to ask yourself this question and really be honest. In your work, your life, your creative process, what routine, what assumption, what standard way of doing things have you just been accepting just because that's how it's done?
All right, here's a simple 3-step way to start using the Zappa Principle. Step 1, find your own conceptual continuity. Look at everything you do. What's the one big idea that connects it all? Step 2, identify the friction. Where does the standard way of doing things cause problems, waste your time, or hold you back? Find that point of resistance. And step 3, raise your level of logic. Don't just complain about the friction, analyze it. Build a better system. Design a process that makes you the master of the outcome, not a victim of the routine.
And this is really the key takeaway. So much of our frustration and burnout comes from feeling like a victim of our circumstances, a victim of an algorithm, a victim of the system. The Zappa Principle is the answer to that. It shows us that by applying rigorous, systematic logic to our problems, we can shift from reacting to everything to creating our own reality. You stop being a victim of the friction and you start becoming the master of the machine.
So, just remember this. Your rebellion doesn't have to be loud or angry. It can be quiet, it can be systematic, and it can be unbelievably powerful. It's about finding the unshakable truth in the logic of your own system and understanding with total clarity that your unique, strategic refusal to accept the standard, that's not a weakness. That's the very source code for your greatness.